Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about being active with an ostomy. And for those that may not know, my name is Melissa France. I'm a project coordinator here at Fight Colorectal Cancer. We are the leading national patient advocacy organization, and we are here to educate you on ostomy care, ostomy life. Joining me today, I have, we are hopefully going to fill up most of this hour for you, but we are going to allot some time at the end to be able to ask some questions. So feel free, you can drop them in our chat function. You can wait until the end. We also have, we will be recording this webinar. So as registrants, you will automatically receive the link to that once it's recording. You can share it out, watch it over and over and over again. And then you're also welcome to tweet along with us using the hashtag CRC webinar. So today I have joining me Julie Brown. She is a stage 3 colon cancer survivor and an ostomate, and I'm going to kick it over to her to let her introduce herself. And I'm going to just take this stop sharing off for a little while, and it'll just be me and Julie talking.
Hi, I'm Julie. So I'm a stage 3C colon cancer survivor. I was diagnosed 13 years ago and had at that point a complete permanent ileostomy. I was in remission for a little bit, but recently I have fallen out of being NED. So I'm in the fight again, which, you know, I think some of us have. So it's, you know, you sort of get through it and you get used to it. But so I'm happy to hopefully answer some questions today about living with an ostomy. I honestly think that it's given me a better quality of life than I had before. Prior to my colon cancer diagnosis, I was a Crohn's patient since I was 12. And so having an ostomy actually has given me a lot more freedom.
Thank you. If you, so how long have you had your ostomy?
So I've had my ostomy about 13 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your recovery, the procedure like? What was kind of life like leading up to the final procedure to have it done?
So I actually met with quite a few surgeons. Some had given me the option of having a reversible ostomy. So having a temporary ostomy put in, having a portion of my colon removed, and then at some point reversing it. And then I met with the surgeon that I ended up deciding to have the surgery with, and she had suggested that I just remove everything. So I had my rectum, my colon, and a portion of my small intestine removed. So I have a permanent ileostomy. And life prior to that, having had Crohn's for many years, I was always sort of in search of a bathroom. And, you know, when she described it to me and she said, look, you know, it's going to take some adjusting to, it's, you know, essentially a pouch that's going to be on your abdomen. I think the first thing I said was, well, I always have to find a bathroom because right now I have a lot of anxiety around going out and, like, you know, public places or places where there would be large crowds, or if I was going to do something active and I didn't know if there would be a restroom. And then in the end, we just decided that this was the best, you know, course of treatment. And it took a little while to recover because I do have a Barbie butt, what they, you know, consider. I had my rectum removed. I think that was the hardest part about recovery, was having my having that huge open wound on your bottom. So it was like probably anywhere from like 4 to 6 months where I spent a good time sort of sitting on a donut, sitting sideways, trying to find be comfortable when I was laying down. And then I think after that, the recovery was just trying to adjust to this new lifestyle and understand my body in a different way.
Okay. So I know you had your ostomy done 13 years ago. You said it was around 4 to 6 months of recovery. Did you have children? How old were they when this happened? What was life like as a mother, as a parent, with the recovery of this procedure?
So at the time when I was diagnosed, I had a 6-year-old and I had a 10-month-old. And it was pretty tough. You have a, you know, 6-year-old running around. I had another 6-year-old, 10-month-old son at the time. So it was really tough trying to be a mom, and especially for someone who has always been pretty active, taking the time to sort of slow down and just let my body get used to the adjustment. It was a huge deal. And then 6 years later, I had 6, 7 years later, I had I had a baby. I was pregnant with an ostomy.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that was, a little bit easier because I wasn't fully recovering from ostomy surgery. But I think, it's a huge toll, I think, on you physically and mentally, just having that surgery. And then also, again, being a new mom.
Yeah. So, because I wasn't aware that you were pregnant while having your ostomy. I guess that didn't even register with the age of your children. So I apologize. So was there anything, I don't want to say special about the pregnancy? Every pregnancy is special, but was there anything that you had to make adjustments for with an ostomy with your pregnancy, or did that not really affect anything in the long run?
I think, it was a little hard, I think, just because at some point our son was pushing on my stoma and my ostomy and had cut off blood supply to it.
Oh.
And I think just it was a little bit more uncomfortable than my prior 2 pregnancies. It also required a lot of planning. So my doctor knew I had an ostomy. And so we prepared and also planned to have a general surgeon in the room, in addition to my OBGYN doctor, just in case there were any issues or complications with my stoma, with my ostomy. So it just required, a lot more planning, thinking things through, just, talking about it. But I think all in all, the pregnancy was a little bit more uncomfortable than, my other pregnancies. But other than that, it was, practically the same. And I was just pretty happy. And I think thankful that we could have another baby.
That's awesome. So before I step away from being pregnant while having an ostomy, what's something that you wish you would have known during pregnancy that might have helped, that might have a tip that would have been useful, anything like that?
I think using a hernia belt would have been helpful to know. I know that some ostomates require a hernia belt. I've been fortunate that I didn't have to use one. But when I was pregnant, it was putting so much pressure on my ostomy that the doctor recommended that maybe we try ostomy hernia belt. And once I started to use that, I was like, I really wish someone had told me this before, but there weren't a lot of resources at the time for people pregnant with ostomies. So, and that was great. I think it was also helpful because we couldn't find one that was big enough. So we were able to sew like 2 of them together. And so all these little things that I think, had I known someone who was pregnant with an ostomy, would have been really helpful at the time. It was sort of just learn as you go.
Okay, that makes sense. It's amazing how, and I'm not even familiar with some of the resources that are available now for pregnant women who might, for patients who have ostomies who might find themselves pregnant, and just some of the cool little gadgets. But I know just in my regular pregnancies, just the vast increase in little gadgets and helpful items. So it'd be interesting to see how it's changed since then. But what would you say was your biggest adjustment? I know you had Crohn's disease, so I could see how it might have made bathroom chips a lot easier. And you had talked about how it did kind of relieve some of the stress after you had the ostomy done. But what was your biggest adjustment to your new life with an ostomy?
I think the biggest adjustment was just listening to my body. So I didn't know. I think when you first get an ostomy, you're just trying to understand the day-to-day living with it, understanding how do you put this bag on? Oh, what do I do if I'm someplace and I'm not home and I have to change it? Like all these little nuances about just, the supplies and all of that stuff in general. And then I think after recovering from surgery, I thought, like the fatigue, the different things like that were just from the surgery. But the more like I looked into it, I spoke with other ostomates and found resources and different groups and chat groups. And the more I talked to my doctor about it, and with being really open about those those issues. Like, for example, I started to get kidney stones and I didn't realize that was related to my ostomy. I didn't realize I was going to be dehydrated more often and I had to drink more fluids. I also didn't realize that, certain parts of your colon and your small intestine are removed during some of these surgeries. And those are the areas that absorb vitamins. So I didn't realize that I was now completely vitamin deficient on certain vitamins. And I would either have to go in and get, shots, or I would have to go in for infusions, or, have to make sure that I was trying to, take them by mouth. And even if I was taking them by mouth, were they being absorbed? So I think it required a lot of communication with the doctor and, not feeling like, oh, this is just part of the recovery or this is part of the surgery. And just really, sharing the things that aren't feeling right and knowing your body. I think it's really important to engage in those conversations, because you may think it's just the recovery from the ostomy, but those are going to be things that you're going to struggle with day to day for the rest of your life. And so I think having those very transparent, open conversations with your doctor are really important.
Absolutely. I know we like to share with patients and survivors and loved ones to share with their family members that no matter what the procedure is, the treatment, that it's okay to talk about your side effects, even if they're quote unquote expected side effects. It's still important to talk to your provider about them, because there are some things that you can do to help with those, just like you had infusions, injections. So it's always important to talk to your provider about those side effects. So staying on that topic a little bit, are there any other tips or tricks that you found along the way? And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but any tips or tricks that you found along the way to help with those specific issues as far as dehydration, just your vitamins being depreciated quicker, anything like that?
So what I do now is I make sure that, I'm getting, blood work done. We're checking in constantly with my doctor, monitoring those things. The other thing is, anyone that goes out with me will always tell you that I'm, constantly trying to drink something, like drink water, drink this, drink that, because I know that I get dehydrated more than the average person. So, I'm always making sure that there's, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to do something active, what's the weather? Is it going to be humid? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? So I'm constantly always trying to sort of make sure that I'm ahead of things and I plan for things, because I think in the end, that's what really helps. Oh, Melissa, I think you're muted. Sorry.
I am. Thank you. Here I am just chatting away. So staying on topic with just your daily routine, what does a typical day for you look like as far as work, your relationships, your parenting? What does just a typical day for you look like? And what adjustments, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And what adjustments do you use to kind of work around your ostomy? How does it help? How does it hinder? Just what are some of the tips and tricks that you found?
Yeah, so being a mom of 3 boys is a lot. So my day usually starts pretty early. I think, the first thing it's helpful just, in the morning, I'm always just checking, my wafer on my ostomy and how are things going? Can I get another day out of it? Can I not? And if I can't, then, I change that first thing in the morning. And then it's just moving and getting the boys moving and then getting to work. And I always carry, I think it's really important because I'm on the go. So I constantly work, and then I'm running back and forth with my kids. And so I always carry a bag of extra supplies. I also put extra clothes in there just in case, accidents happen. Even if, as many years as I've had an ostomy, I still have little blowouts and accidents. And I think just, making sure that I have all the stuff sort of alleviates any anxiety around potentially having those things. So I make sure that I have, work, change of clothes. I carry a supply bag of all my ostomies. My friends will laugh. My husband always gets upset because sometimes I'll throw an ostomy in my bag in my back pocket, and it'll go through the washer. Nothing's in it. It's just an extra ostomy bag, but sometimes I literally will carry one in my back pocket just so that I have it in case I do get a rip or a leak in the bag. And I have it in my pants when I go to the bathroom in case I forget to bring my ostomy supply bag. And then the rest of the days, it depends if it's a weekend or a day, a weekday, if my kids want to play or something. A lot of times, if it's something that's heavy duty, requires like a lot of impact on my core, then I'll make sure I wear like, a hernia belt or some sort of belt to hold my ostomy. I think, my day-to-day, a lot of people wear belts. I don't wear a belt. I think I've sort of adjusted my undergarments. Like, there's certain panties or different things that I like to wear that I think are more comfortable as an ostomate. Yeah, and I think it's, hasn't had too much of an impact, I think, on the day-to-day stuff. It's more now just about planning and, working my life around, making sure I have stuff when I'm going someplace, that I'm planning ahead of time, that I have extra bags. I have, I use stoma paste, that I have a wafer, that I bring medical scissors. So it's a lot more planning ahead of time than it used to be before I had an ostomy. But I think in the end, it alleviates a lot of stress and makes it easier for me.
That's awesome. And absolutely understandable considering the issues that you had before you had it. Just the anxiety of needing to know exactly where a bathroom is at all times. So speaking on planning and going away, I saw recently that you just went on vacation. Were you swimming with dolphins? Were you swimming? Like, what does that look like? How do you get to plan these amazing trips and these fun trips? What does that look like? What do you pack? How do you protect your bag? How do you protect your site if you're going to be in the water?
So I think that, I wear a certain type of swimsuit. So I like a two-piece swimsuit only because I think that it's easier, especially if I have to empty my bag, than having a one-piece swimsuit on. But I usually find ones that have like if I'm wearing like a tankini bathing suit, like usually the ones that have more reinforcement around your waist or something, I think are really helpful, especially if you're going to do a lot of like physical activity in the water. And I pretty much just make sure that I'm planning ahead of time. Like life doesn't stop when I think when you have an ostomy, and that's something that I had to learn was that it's going to keep going and I got to just sort of flow with it, especially with kids. So I always make sure that, we go on a lot of trips. We don't let having an ostomy stop me or the family from doing anything. And especially I think being a cancer, survivor, you always want to make sure that you're living the most out of your life because you sort of start to think about time being so much more precious than it used to be. So, a lot of times we'll just, plan trips and then I'll sort of figure out, swimming with dolphins. Okay, that day I'm going to wear this bathing suit and it's going to provide pretty good coverage over my ostomy. And then when we went, I asked the lady, I said, I know you said we can't bring out things, but I have a bag of supplies just in case my bag comes loose. And most people are really understanding about it. And they understand, when you say, hey, do you mind? I know I'm not supposed to bring anything, or, hey, I have these extra supplies because I have this medical condition. I also think that, for us traveling internationally, we always just make sure that, I have a note from my doctor, because, sometimes at airports, people don't understand what an ostomy is. So, and they're, what do you have under there? What's going on? So I always have a note from my doctor, and then I always keep everything separate in a separate bag. And I have a little tag on it that says medical supplies, and use that for airplane rides, keep it outside of my luggage just in case my luggage gets lost, because I can't, don't want to be without bags if there's an emergency. I also wear sometimes a lot of different, they sell like bands that can go around your waist and your ostomy, when you're swimming, or like if we're jet skiing, or, we went parasailing and different things, just to give me some more, comfort in knowing that it's, up against my body, it's not going to pull off or anything like that. And I think if there's something you're not comfortable with, there's so many resources out there to find out where, there are different supplies and different things that ostomates use.
Okay. Do you use anything? So you said that you use a special, or you wear a swimsuit, there's a special binder that you can use if you'd like. Do you change any of your like routine supplies, your paste or anything like that? Is that changed? Do you change how you apply it, how you put it on, anything like that when you're going on these special circumstances? Usually
I want to make sure, like if I'm going swimming, I usually want to make sure that for me, I don't want to have a wafer on that's been on for a few days, because I feel like it starts to peel up around the edges and then water gets underneath it. So for days like that, where, we know that we're going to do something pretty physical and it's going to be in the water, I'll make sure that it's a pretty new wafer is on there. One of the other tricks that I always use is I take a blow dryer because it actually heats up the wafer so that it sticks a lot better than if you just take it straight off the backing.
Mhm.
And so I found that that really helps. I remember, a couple of people had told me just, rub it between your hands. The heat's going to heat up the adhesive. And I was like, oh, that doesn't really work so well for me. And then I remember one time I was blow drying my hair and I was like, oh, let me see if this works, And so it really got, you have to obviously be careful. You don't want it to be too hot, but really got the adhesive pretty sticky and it works well. I also make sure that I use stoma paste around my stoma when I'm putting it down, because then water, and anything so that it doesn't pancake underneath my wafer. And I found that that's really helpful. But I don't use a very big bag. I found out in the first year I was using a regular size bag that I went home from the hospital with. And, being sort of a short person and only being 5'2", it hung below my bathing suit. It was, bulky and closed. And when I was doing activity, there was more bag available to sort of move around or get ripped or adjusted. So I actually moved to a smaller bag that I use now. And I think, sometimes it requires more emptying, but it makes me feel more comfortable when I'm doing more physical activities.
Okay. Do you only use that for your physical activities, or have you adjusted that and made that a part of your routine use?
I've made it now part of my everyday routine use. I think it just helps. I think it feels a lot more comfortable, especially when the bag fills up as a short person. So I think, the best thing that I always tell people is, a lot of times people are like, oh, this is what I went home in the hospital with, and this is what I should use. And I say, well, ask, because, that may be what worked at the hospital, but you have to take into account your daily life, all the kinds of activities. Are you active? Do you do this? And you may find that a different bag helps. I also think one of the other things I learned was that a couple of the bags that I initially used caused a rash. So the adhesive, I think, was really harsh on my skin. So I tried different brands and different types just to make sure that, those ones felt the best, felt most comfortable for me. And so I always tell people, don't settle for what they send you home with. Make sure you ask your nurses and your doctors about, are there other size bags? Are there different types of bags? Is it something sensory about the way the bag feels? Because sometimes they feel differently. And are there other tools that you can use besides just having a wafer and the bag?
That's some great advice. So in the years that you've had it, I know that I'd asked you if there's anything that you wish you would have known about pregnancy. Is there anything that you wish you would have known just in general about ostomy and ostomy care?
I think I wish I didn't realize, I think, because at the time I was only thinking about, doing what I could to be alive for my kids. So I think at the time I didn't realize that ostomies had such a stigma. And so for me, one of the hardest things to learn later after the fact was I'm just in general a pretty private person. So I didn't share it, didn't talk about it, but it wasn't because I was really embarrassed about it. I just thought that's not something that, you sort of put out there. Hey, I have an ostomy. But after finding out that, people really struggled with it, I met other cancer patients who said, I had an ostomy, I woke up with an ostomy, didn't know I was going to get one, and I wanted to, kill myself, or, I was really upset about it. I cried and I cried. And I thought, wow, I never felt that way. I always thought of it sort of as a gift in a way that it gave me more time and it gave me the ability to be active again. And so I think I wish I had known those things, because I think that would have helped me be more open about my ostomy from the beginning. It probably wasn't until 6 or 7 years into my cancer journey that I realized, that people were upset or, had such a negative feelings about having an ostomy. And I wish I had known that sooner, because I think I would have shared more openly on social media and different places that, having an ostomy is an adjustment, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that we can do as ostomates. It shouldn't limit our day-to-day activities and so forth and how we live our lives.
Absolutely. And that's a good reminder. What's your favorite activity to do? I know that this is being active with an ostomy. We talked about being active, planning ahead, just your daily routine, just not letting it hold you back. But what are your favorite activities to do?
I think traveling. So we travel a lot, and I love that. I love, it's also interesting because you can go to when you go to other countries, you also see sort of how they handle people with ostomies. For example, in Asia, they have like ostomy bathrooms. And I was like, oh, we don't have these in the US. These are amazing.
Yeah.
So it's also nice to sort of see like what life could be like outside of the US with an ostomy. So we really love traveling. We also love hiking. So our family's pretty active. Our boys love the outdoors in the woods. And so, one of the things I've had to learn is, when we're hiking, taking stuff in and making sure that, if I have bag change or other things, like what supplies do I need, and sort of how to do those in a typical outside environment, not in a bathroom or not someplace in a room where, you have all this stuff and you have the counter set up all easily, but being able to learn and do those things on the fly outdoors. And that has been sort of, the two things that we've continued to do that I'm really thankful that I get to do.
That's awesome. So speaking of hiking, do you have any tips and tricks for how do you do that while you're hiking? Elaborate.
A few of my friends will be outraged that I say this, but like sometimes like if I have to go to the bathroom, I will empty in the woods. I always bring trash bags, extra ostomy bag supplies to make sure that anything that I take in, I come out with, just to be fair to the environment and be good to the environment. So I always make sure I have plenty of little trash bags. Sometimes it requires, finding, a tree or rocks or something that are pretty at a decent height, similar to your bathroom or any surfaces. And I always just make sure I have all my supplies. And the other thing I do is I make sure that my wafers are pre-cut. And everything is, pretty much prepared ahead of time if I do have to have a change or if I need to make a change. So it just requires me making sure that like if some of the resources that I would normally have in a bathroom or at home, I won't have, what can I do with the materials to make sure that, they're ready to be used immediately without all those little things. I also make sure if I'm hiking that I always have plenty of water. Hydration is like really key for me. So I'll make sure that we have like, lots of fluids, and snacks and things that aren't going to cause, blockages and different things. And, each person I think sort of has their own diet for what works for them with an ostomy.
Mm-hmm. Now it sounds like you have to bring a lot with you on a hiking trip. Do you have any tips for how to pack it all away to make it because I know like camping videos that I see, it's like how to roll it a certain way to like pack it just right. So you're not like carrying this huge backpack, but are there any tips or tricks for how to get it to your destination?
So I usually have two bags. So if I'm doing a day hiking, I take a smaller hiking bag. And if we're doing anything overnight, then it goes in a bigger bag, but everything gets rolled up. Everything gets, put as small as possible. I also don't take my usual ostomy supply bag. What I'll do is I'll take a few things out of there and then pack them in Ziploc bags. So I can throw them in a pocket and it's readily available.
That's a good idea. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and it kind of ties into this first question that we have that came in. But if you had to run out of your house and could only grab like a handful of things for your ostomy, what would you grab? What would be your like top 5 go-to must-have, regardless of everything else going on, items?
I would always say I always have baby wipes, some sort of wipes. And they're usually the ones without any like any perfume or anything, any additives. I would say I always have a bag because I always have one in my pocket most of the time, even if I don't have, and I would say a wafer. So those are the 3 things I would absolutely have to have. It would be great to have everything else, but if I knew just in case I had an accident or something, at least if I had those 3 things, that I'd be okay.
Awesome. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and roll into the couple of questions that have come in. So James asks, and he says that you touched on it a bit, but what kind of extra stuff do you keep in your ostomy go bag beyond extra pouches, wet wipes, alcohol, skin barrier spray, etc.? Any special tricks?
So I like to have a little mini blow dryer. You can buy a really tiny one, and sometimes I'll carry that in there just in case, because there have been times where I've gone places and my wafer might not stick, and then I'll go through a couple of wafers and I'll get frustrated and I finally use like a blow dryer and it works. So I always make sure I have like a mini blow dryer, a travel size tiny one. And then the other thing I carry in there are any prescriptions that I need. I still have to take certain meds, so I always make sure that I have my prescriptions in there, and then they also have like the doctor's information and everything. The other thing that I'll do, and it sounds really weird, is I will carry a toilet paper tube. So sometimes when you're having a bag change, they have like the Stoma Genie, and they have all the new supplies that you can put over your stoma so it doesn't leak down when you're changing it. But I'll have like 1 or 2 little toilet paper tubes left over from the rolls. And I will put them in there because that way, if I have to change it and I'm out, like, you know, in a public bathroom or someplace, I can just throw those in my bag, my ostomy bag, and throw it away. And I always make sure I have little trash bags. And I usually get the scented little trash bags to help cover up stuff. I also use like the M9 spray, which is for, you know, sometimes scent and different things. So I'll put them in one of those little tiny travel like spray bottle things that you get in the, you know, your toiletry bag, and put it in there rather than carrying the big bottle. So those are some extra things that I usually keep in my bag besides, and then if, most of the time, if I don't have a pair of shorts or pants in there, I'll at least have a pair of panties.
Okay, thank you. James also asked, have you experimented with wearing the bag sideways? They haven't tried it themselves, but
I haven't. I did it once. I think I like just having it go down because I worry sometimes, like when, you know, output sort of gets back underneath the wafer. So I like having it down so that I know, like, okay, I generally like will touch my tummy and I'm like, oh, okay, I can feel it starting to fill up. And I just worry sometimes about output getting back underneath the wafer and then pancaking underneath that.
Jessica asks, in your years with an ostomy, have you had any issues with prolapsing during activities? I'm struggling with several inches of prolapsing after nearly any physical activity. This then leads to more leaks and makes it more challenging when trying to put on a new bag.
I don't have it when I do physical activities. I did have issues with that when I was pregnant. So my stoma changed sizes almost every month. It grew for a little bit, and then at some point it prolapsed, and then went back to its original where it was before the pregnancy, after I, you know, had my son. But I haven't had any issues with that when I exercise. I think the only time I had any issues with that, and it was difficult, was just when I was pregnant. And what I did then was I actually switched bags, because they have different types of wafers, some that work better for, you know, stomas that are out, stomas that are in. So I actually spoke to my nurse at the time and said, is there another sort of, you know, wafer or bag that I could use, or anything that would help? And then she suggested, and I switched over to a different brand of a wafer.
Okay, sounds like your team was really great in helping you troubleshoot some of those issues as they came up.
Yeah, I always make sure, like, if I notice something isn't right, I talk to my nurse, but I also find really talking to ostomates online. So there's a couple of, you know, social media groups for ostomates. I like being able to ask questions there sometimes too, because those are the people that have, you know, the nurses are great, but people who actually have ostomies have the experience, so they'll give me a lot of tips on different things. So if I notice something isn't working or I'm having an issue with something, you know, I'll put out a question and people will reply. And I think that's always helpful to have that real life experience.
Absolutely. So my background is in nursing. I'm a registered nurse, and I've had some experience with ostomies years ago, but it is much different. Like, being the person that's doing them, those everyday little tips and tricks that, like, is just not something that I can just imagine and think up. So it's awesome to have these communities where people can come together and share their tips, share their issues, and find support.
I agree.
So Paula asked, what are 4 things nobody told you that you can share now?
4 things that nobody told me that I can share now. I think I didn't expect, you know, my doctor said 6 weeks for recovery for my bottom. now I can talk about it. At the time I was like horrified to tell anybody I had this huge wound, open wound on my bottom. But I think, it also, I was starting chemo, so my, body wasn't really healing it the way it should have been. But I think, if someone had told me, it might not be 6 weeks, it could be, 3 months, it could be 2 months, it could be 6 months, it wouldn't have had this expectation in my brain that I should be better now. This should be gone. Yeah. So I think, that's one thing now that I always tell people, I'm like, your body's going to heal. It's your body's rate. Don't, I can't tell you, because people say, well, how long is it going to take? And I'm like, I don't know. And so it could be, but that's something important. So you don't set expectations and then get so frustrated, especially because this is a whole new experience. I also think that, no one told me about dating. So I was getting a divorce when I went through chemo and when I had cancer. And so I think that, I had never in my brain even thought that I was going to be dating anyone or having to tell someone about an ostomy when I met them. So I wish, I'm so glad like now that I've gone through that experience, but I think that it would have been helpful having someone to sort of talk to about those things. Because, going into, a new relationship and sort of saying, hey, I have this, a lot of people don't understand it, don't know what it is and so forth. So I wish, I'd had someone sort of to give me some advice during that time frame. I also think that there's not a lot of information out there about intimacy in ostomies.
Mhm.
So I think that that's something that I wish I'd had more information on, or, someone being able to say, that they have like undergarments that hold it against your body for like that. So you do feel still pretty in lingerie and different things. I wish I had known those kinds of things. And then I wish that someone had told me about sort of panties and things too, because I think as an ostomate, sometimes you really want something that fits comfortably. And it's hard when you're used to wearing something else. And then you see some of the things that they tell you are for ostomates, and you're like, oh, that's not really attractive. And so that's not really this. So I wish I'd had more information on like, whether it be clothing or different things that, and there was a forum where I could have gotten more information around those things.
Mm-hmm. So not to put you on the spot and make things too uncomfortable and veer away from Paula's question, but is there anything that you can touch on the experiences you had dating with an ostomy and intimacy and adjustments you had to make? I know you talked about the lingerie, you talked about other things to help you feel pretty, but are there any things and any tips that you're willing to share now with everybody?
I think the biggest tip for me was that my husband will tell you that he thinks I tried to scare him off from the beginning. But I kind of just wanted to be open. I was like, look, this is what I've been through. This is what, this is me. This is a new normal in my life. And so I think, just being upfront and open about those things. And, at the end of the day, if it's someone who's like, wait a second, I don't want to deal with that, or, it's probably better in the long run for you anyways, because I'm so thankful that my husband was so open to it. And then it was kind of funny because he said he started Googling it. So when we would go on dates, he'd have questions about it. Like, okay, so like I learned this, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And I was like, wow, you took the effort and the time to like learn about this stuff. And I also think that one of the biggest things is like, just at some point is being able to feel comfortable in your own skin, is that we all have different shapes, different sizes. And I think that, just knowing that, we have an ostomy and it's, not something people openly talk about, but it doesn't change who I am at the end of the day. And if someone, I think knows about it, the more you can say, hey, that doesn't stop me from doing anything. I can do everything you do. So.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. James said, thanks for the blow dryer tip. That's a new one. And Shannon asked, I wore period underwear since they usually have pockets on the days I wore a dress or something that didn't have pockets. Put a spare bag in the pocket. Also did a liquid diet when I went out or went swimming. It limited output. Are there any tips and tricks you use?
So I also, marshmallows give me limited output. So I know there's certain foods that I eat that will slow down my output, especially with an ileostomy, because, sometimes with an ileostomy you eat and it feels right, it fills right back up. So one of the things that I use is I'll have a marshmallow and it slows down my output. Also, it's funny, if I eat anything that's like really starchy, like bread or something, that also slows down my output.
Okay. Kimberly said, do you use an adhesive remover to remove your wafer? What's your preferred product?
I don't use an adhesive remover. I think I've been really thankful that I haven't had any real skin issues. The only time I had irritation was around my pregnancy, and that was because my stoma was changing sizes constantly, and so that was affecting my, my wafer sticking or adjusting, and as I was getting used to finding new wafers that worked for me. So my skin is actually pretty good, like around there. I don't have, any like open wounds or any sores or anything like that. So it sticks pretty good. And then usually I'll slowly peel it off. And then it'll just completely, come off, but I won't rip it off. I'll take it like a little bit slow at the top and sort of pull it down. And I don't usually have any issues with removing it.
Okay, that's awesome. There was Alfie had their hand up, and I just messaged them to see if they had a question. So if you drop that in the Q&A, we can get that answered for you. Oh, Shannon said, Julie has always impressed me with her back pocket bag.
Everybody who knows me knows I always
it's like the pin in the dryer, except it doesn't leave ink everywhere.
It's so funny. Yeah, it's because you could be anywhere and then I'll be like, oh, and I'll pull out a bag from my pocket.
I got one. Well, while we're waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, we'll completely open it up. Those are some that came while you were talking, but if you have any questions, go ahead, feel free to put them in the Q&A. So Alfie did have a question. They said, what size is the smaller bag and what brand?
So I use a Coloplast bag, and it's probably about 4 inches by about 5 inches by 7 inches. So it's like pretty tiny. And I love it. It's like a little mini bag. And I think it works well. It's great for like, especially making me feel comfortable to having it underneath my clothes, so it doesn't bulk up as much when it fills up. And I also think it's comfortable, like, being able to wear shorts and it doesn't come out underneath your shorts where people can see it. Awesome.
Thank you. So we'll leave it open again. Like I said, as more questions, every time I say that, one pops up. Jessica says, it sounds like you prefer ostomy paste over the barrier rings.
I do. So I did try barrier rings. The reason I think I prefer ostomy paste is because I can put I can fit it, I can draw the line with the stoma paste exactly where it goes and where I want it to work. Because sometimes, as you lose weight, you gain weight, your stomach sort of, it changes. And so I feel like I can sort of push it down a little bit more. Sometimes I'll have less stoma paste on one side of my stoma, more on the other side. And it gives me flexibility to know how it's sitting on my body. So I prefer using that rather than a barrier ring. I've tried a barrier ring, but it doesn't work for me. So I always tell people just to do what works best for you.
Great. Oh, Shannon said, do you ever use stoma caps for intimacy or swimming, etc.?
I have used it before. I don't like to use it though, just because I do have an ileostomy. So the issue is that I have a lot more output. If I know it's some day where I haven't been eating or I'm not feeling so great or, something, I may put one on, but most of the time I just go with my bag and don't have any issues with it.
All right. Can you describe what that is, what they're asking for those that may not know exactly what it is?
So stoma cap is something that you put over your stoma. So it's basically, it'll be against your body. And rather than have the bag, it's a cap that just is there. So if you have output, like high output, because some people, if typically people have colostomies, don't have as high output as an ileostomy. So they'll opt to wear it a lot more. For someone like me with an ileostomy, because if I eat, I know that I'm going to have output. So I prepare for that and I make sure that, I'm near some place so my bag doesn't get too full and I don't feel like I'm worried about it, bursting or anything like that. But a lot of times people who have minimal output on a regular basis will wear a stoma cap, rather than wearing a bag. And it just goes over your stoma and it goes against your body. And it's a tiny little cap that, you know, sits over your stoma without the bag.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Alfie asked, do you mind saying the brand again for your bags?
It's Coloplast.
Coloplast.
Yeah. And I think it's the Assura, Coloplast Assura, I believe.
All right. And then James said, you mentioned you tried various belts for being active. Any to suggest? The stealth belt looked interesting. Goal is to try and run again.
I think the stealth belt works great. I have used that. I use that when I ski sometimes. So, and I know that they also make a version, I think, for water. I haven't tried the water one. Typically, I think that's what's nice about women's swimsuits is you can find ones that are more, you know, with the elasticy material that'll hold tight against your stomach. So I don't use it when I swim, but I have used a stealth belt for when I'm skiing, or when I used to play softball, I would use it too, just because if I had to dive or if I was running back anywhere and I happened to like mistakenly land on my stomach. One time I was like, oh my gosh, I was so nervous about my bag bursting. So I will wear those when I'm doing something more physical where there's potential that the bag won't be up against my body like it usually is.
Shannon said, for us ignorant ones, what is the barrier paste rings for? How do you use it?
So those will typically go around your stoma, and they usually provide protection. So what happens is so when you have your wafer, you can buy a wafer, you can get your wafers pre-cut. So most bags supplies will come with, it's like a little measuring, a bunch of little holes.
Like size guide holes.
Size guide holes. And so you can usually measure your stoma using that. And you can say it's, you know, this big or it's this big. And you can opt to have your bags pre-cut from the supplier. Most supply companies will do that for you. Some people will prefer to not have them pre-cut and then you just cut them yourself with medical scissors. I typically don't have mine pre-cut because sometimes my stoma will change in size. Like, you know, during certain, like, honestly, like, when I'm on my, this is going to sound a little TMI, but when I'm on my,
what are you here for?
When I'm on my monthly as a woman, when I was having it, you know, my stoma would change in size during that time. And so there's different times where sometimes your stoma will change. So I chose not to get mine pre-cut. And sometimes what'll happen is, you know, if, you know, your stomach, if it's digesting food, your stoma will like move and it'll change in size. And what happens is underneath that little ring that goes around your stoma is output sometimes, especially, or if your bag is full, or sometimes if you're sleeping and you don't realize that it's full, and the output will get underneath your stoma and underneath the wafer. And then it'll start to spread out. And sometimes it'll make the wafer pop up, or, you know, it'll pancake, and then, you know, it'll come loose. So the barrier rings really help with that because they sort of stop the seepage right there. And that seepage can also cause like irritation on your skin, you know, because it's, you know, it's fecal matter. It's like, you know, acidity, stomach bile, and different things. So it can do damage to your skin. So having the stoma paste or the barrier ring thing really helps because it'll stop all of that from getting underneath your skin, making your wafer last longer, but it will also hopefully prevent any damage to the skin underneath there.
Thank you. And then Shannon said, great tips. My colostomy acted like an ileostomy and they would poop while eating. So maybe the cap's not the best option for you. So before we wrap up, we've got about 10 minutes left. Shannon said, my stoma was oval, so I cut my wafer myself. I made my own templates. They made life easier. Any advice on tricks you use for that and putting your bag on and aligning it? TGT was something I struggled with. Also, how to prevent blowouts.
I think for me, the biggest thing is just making sure like people, you know, like I will sort of discreetly like touch my bag. If I feel that it's going to get close to being full, I'll make sure I go to the bathroom. Like I don't wait till it's like about to explode because I think that doesn't help with blowouts. I also think watching what you eat. So I think it took me a while. is I don't eat big meals after a certain time, because I know that if I eat after a certain time, then in the middle of the night, I'll have a lot of output. And my bag sometimes, like, or I know, like, if I drink sodas after a certain time, or, certain foods will give me more gas, so my bag will fill up. And then there's the potential with gas, because it's, it'll literally look like a balloon, for it to sort of explode at night. So I think it's knowing what kind of foods and what effect they have on you and how they affect your output. And then for me, it's just easier to sort of monitor that before I go to bed, or, before I go on an airplane or someplace, I sort of prepare for that. And I think that for cutting the bag, I think I try not to do it too close. Like, I try to give myself at least a tiny little sort of outer, like, little space, which is why I also use the stoma paste, because I also think that, my stoma, if, when it rubs up against stuff, tends to bleed. And so I also worry about blood pooling underneath there and different things. So I know for me, what works is just to cut a little bit of extra space around there, and then I fill that gap with the stoma paste.
A couple other comments. Cheryl, one of our 2021 ambassadors, said that she doesn't have a question, but she just wanted to say thank you to Julie for sharing, and to Fight CRC Melissa for hosting. So thank you, Cheryl, for being here with us. Shannon said, most of my blowouts happened while sleeping. The paranoia affected my sleep. Thanks for amazing advice. You're helping lots of people, as you are. We're appreciative of you being here. And then James said, FYI, this has made a huge difference for me keeping a bag longer. Ostomy appliance belt, about 1 inch tall elastic belt that hooks into the pouch. Seems to apply just enough pressure against the body. So thank you. Thank you all for your comments. Yeah. I will go ahead and close out questions unless you have any. If you think of any questions that you have after the webinar's over, feel free to email them to me at melissa@fightcrc.org. I can pass them along to Julie and we can get those answered for you. We will also have a recording of this webinar that I will send directly to y'all, so that if you missed anything, if you want to go back and listen and find the names of the brands, any of the tips that she shared, you can revisit it. James said, thanks, Julie, appreciate your sharing. And then Julie, is there anything else before we end that you just want to feel like we didn't cover, or just anything, final word that you want to share?
No, I just think that, I know that it's an adjustment to have an ostomy. I just really hope that people understand that, you can still do all the things that you did before your ostomy. And there's so many resources out there. I mean, even just in the 13 years since I've had my ostomy, so many new resources, so much more awareness about it. So I just encourage everyone to, don't give up. It's not the end of the world. Having an ostomy doesn't prevent you from doing anything. And just to make sure that you find those groups and find those support groups, and, share and get information on ostomies. Absolutely. Thank you. And with that, speaking of sharing, or the support groups, we have a group, Community of Champions, where we have a space that is dedicated specifically to patients with ostomies. So in my follow-up email, I will also link that too, so that you can become a member of that group, so that you can join in on the conversation. You can take this conversation and we can continue it there. But again, thank you so much, Julie, for being here with us. Thank you for taking the time to share your story, share your tips, your tricks, the ups and the downs of being active with an ostomy. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see y'all next time. Bye. Thank you.